We are back in session and will now proceed to our committee reports. I'll remind committee chairs in the audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will occur at the end of the agenda via roll call vote. We'll begin with the Business Operations Committee led by Vice Chair Duncan. Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. On behalf of Todd Chastain and myself, we lead the Business Operations Committee. We had a number of items on our committee schedule yesterday, so I will try to go through them as concisely but as quickly as I can. Our first item, BizOp 1, was approval of contracts over $500,000. We had two such contracts in the technology services area were presented by Mr. Julian Alhauer and Ms. Tracy Tillis. We had a third contract on federal programs monitoring and support presented by Dr. Townsend. And finally, a Read to Achieve modification to that contract, which is beneficial in terms of getting some additional services, particularly in the Spanish languages area, and Ms. Amy Ryan reported on that. So BizOp 2, and these are all actions on first read. BizOp 2 was elementary and secondary act material. In this one, Dr. Townsend reported on the work that needs to be done in terms of doing getting a waiver for the federal program monitoring and support. The recommendation was made that, and the recommendation is that the board approve such a request for final waiver, subject to and pending the conclusion of the public comment period if no significant changes are made. There's not an anticipation that there will be further requests for changes, and this will give greater flexibility, if you will, in the way that these funds can be best used as we go forward. BizOp 3 was a report on the McKinney-Vento homeless education of children and youth status update. And we renew our focus on these are students who find themselves in a condition of homelessness as opposed to saying that they're homeless students. As a reminder to myself and to all of us that we need to continue to reference these students in that way. Certainly a condition we hope does not sustain for each of the students who ever find themselves in that place. Thought we received a very moving and important report about the status of where we are in our state with respect to students who are finding themselves in this condition around our state, and the fact that we're looking at a period where the only reasonable assessment is to believe that there are more students who may find themselves in this state before long. Ms. White made an important comment and shared some information that certainly supported that conclusion. I think we were all touched by the dedication of the people who are working in this area, and I think it was a very valuable report you might not anticipate coming from the BizOp committee, but it truly was a very human report and much appreciated. In addition to the report, Dr. Townsend then reported on the funding that is available through a grant program of approximately $5.8 million, and the methodology that's been gone about to be used, how to assess the applications that were made for that funding and how that funding is to be distributed. That's additional funding that comes to us from the ESSER 3 funds. There are two parts of it. We heard about the first part, the $5.8 million. In this meeting, we have coming to us a report soon, either next month or the month after, about an additional $23 million that will be allocated rather than by grants, will be allocated through a formula approach to all districts. So a very good report, and again, a reemphasis of the amount of work that's going on in this area and the fact that we've got resources unlike what we've had before to try to make a difference. After we listen to the state of the circumstances for so many of our students, there's no better time than now to be incredibly good stewards of the usage of those funds for our kids. We then went on to BizOp 4, which was a report by John Kiefer. And Mr. Kiefer, who especially appears to try to explain the unexplainable in terms that is very difficult concepts, in terms that are understandable. And in this particular one, we were talking about how to improve school district performance. These again involved ESSER 3 funds, and the recommendation here was to make a policy amendment with respect to our students without a home at this point in time as defined under the Act, how we can best allocate those funds and what the allocation approach will be, particularly looking forward to the 17 million plus that will be allocated in one of our upcoming near meetings. So that was helpful and preparatory to the work that we will be doing soon in terms of the allocations. BizOp 5 was another ESSER 3 item, and this was again presented by John Kiefer. And in this particular item, the recommendation is that the State Board of Education approve modifications of the ALOT 003 policy. The purpose of that goes back to separating allocations that have been made pursuant to the legislature's finding that up to $20 million should be available to fund all PSUs up to $400 a student with respect to Title I funding from the ESSER 3 public school supplemental funding approach. So this, we will approve the allocation and approve how it should be done through the proper code PRC 181. And that is what is before us today on this particular item. Our next item was BizOp number 6, the Small Rural Schools Achievement Program. Again, Mr. Kiefer explained that we have set up an approach for how these funds are distributed. But we are revising PRC 91 to go about an allocation approach, or really more an accounting for the allocation approach that better matches up with the federal funding requirements. What we were doing was appropriate and correct. This will make it even clearer, and so we would be approving, in essence, a new format for identifying how the funding or allocations are made that is in better consistency or format for the federal government who may review the use of these funds. BizOp number 7 was the American Rescue Plan Committee of Practitioners plan. It's a new policy of the board. Dr. Marr, and I want to stop and apologize. I have pronounced his name in different ways at different times. And I have said, I see Michael back, so this is a personal apology to you. And I know I've said Mahar on numerous occasions, and it's Marr. And to tell you what a good person Michael is, I've done that in his presence. He's never corrected me. So, but someone else was kind enough to get me on the right path. And Michael, I want you to know I pledge to stay there hereafter. So Dr. Marr and Dr. Townsend Smith made a presentation consistent with the Act. As you'll recall, there's a requirement that, and a good requirement, that we should have broad community input and support to assist with the identification of how these funds can be most effectively used in conjunction with the department. So a policy's been provided to have a very robust committee to provide input and support. Dr. Marr has warned that the committee should expect this not to be an honorary title, but they will be expected to work and give input and provide support to the work of the department on this. And so that policy is for the board's approval today. BizOp number 9 is it was presented by Dr. Harvey, which is it's an ESSER 2 fund, just to get us in our right allocations. And it's a policy amendment for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund for the statewide school nutrition program. As you will recall, Dr. Harvey very appropriately lauded the nutrition workers that we have, or child nutrition workers we have around the state, for the incredible work they've been doing since March of last year to try to assure all our students are fed, whether at the school location or not, when we've had so much of the time we've been remote. And the fact that that's worked a tremendous amount of hardship on our employees, but they've done it with a great deal of effort and in some instances courage at the height of the epidemic, and with a really glad heart. So it's a good time to lift that up. It's $10 million. It's in an allocation. It's our intent to try to support the actual employees who are doing this work by getting some additional employees, because we're having trouble here and in other areas. Bus services we've also talked about in this meeting, and so, or transportation services. And so in this instance focused on our child nutrition workers. This money is set to be approved, the $10 million, in order to be able to support the work that's going on in the child nutrition area. Very important funding and well-deserved and well-needed, most importantly. Biz Op 10 and 11 I'll talk about together, if I could. Ms. Lynn Barber and Dr. Marr presented a policy amendment on 10 for the Elementary and School Emergency Relief Act. This is ESSER 2 funds relating to the Summer Learning K-12 Summer Bridge Program, and then also ESSER 2 funds presentation on the Summer Learning Career Accelerator programs. And the approach, as you will recall from the discussion, is that we had these programs this past summer. They had to be done rather quickly because of the timing of the passing of the legislation, and so the planning time was tight, but the report was given about going around the state and seeing some good things happen. It's the effort of the department to put together a program this coming summer based on what was learned during the course of this past summer that's most beneficial in the way of both a bridge program and in the way of a career accelerator program. So taking best practices, the department is working on a submission for what our programs would look like, and then have applications come in for the districts. The original proposal, I think, was for the applications to be in by November 30th at the latest, but that's been pushed back into December to give a little bit more time. The biggest drawback is not all the data is in from the summer programs that we just had, but drawing on the expertise of the office and having looked at these programs, and more importantly, and just as importantly, the expertise of our local districts about what may have worked. The plan is to be able to put together the applications and be able to review and approve those based on best practices, so that we're in a position next summer where we have funding that's been allocated for this purpose, that we're in a place to use that funding for the best possible purposes of helping our students who need the help the most. That will be the focus of what's going on here. In the districts, we will hope will be working very hard on meaningful applications, and then have the time to set those programs up. Dr. Marr and Ms. Barber also were able to assure us that if there is additional data that comes in after the time of the application that could help form the programs as the districts are putting together the work, that certainly that information is going to be made available to help guide the districts, and the office will be very much focused on helping the districts in that regard. Biz Op 12 was a policy amendment for elementary and secondary school relief fund, again ESSER 2 for competency-based assessment. And the key feature of this particular item that we're voting on as our last action on first read is that this is a request that we make an application by the Office of Learning and Recovery for an adjustment to the allotment policy to provide greater flexibility with the application due date. So the intent here would be to best use the funds and take advantage of the ability to alter the application due date to some degree. And so the request is that the board approve that, and the reason for the request is that we believe we will do much better work with that extension of the application due date. We as a state will do much better work, and so that is before the board. We then move on to Biz Op 13, which is an action item. This is the establishment of school bus routes, and we have the new policy put before us with respect to transportation technology considerations. I know board members will recall that we have discussed this for a couple of meetings, and the various nuances and technical requirements involved here, which are complex, and Kevin Harrison did a good job of presenting to us what needs to be done with respect to this. Before the board now is the specific language of the policy that focuses on how we determine equivalencies, and then are able to allow districts who want to, who have the desire to use some different product than the TIMS product, which has been in place for a long time. Obviously, the requirements of the TIMS product, which are statutorily set, will continue to need to be met. So these are not in any way trying to change that reporting requirement. And the focus will always be on our students, how we can best logistically get our students to school. And it's worth pausing for a moment that there's some belief that if we look at different systems, there may be some improvement in efficiencies if we are able to do that. And certainly improvements of efficiencies translate to savings for the state. This issue is just a brief comment. We didn't talk about this much in the committee meeting, but I know this issue is a hot topic because I think we've all heard as members of the board that there's a real shortage of bus drivers. And so how we try to address that is important as we go forward. And one of the things that I noted just in driving down here as I came by at 6:45 in the morning on Tuesday by Sedalia Elementary School, the cars were already lined up way out into the street on both directions of 70. And so there's, for a number of reasons, there's a heavier car ridership, I think, in progress right now. And if you live close to a school, I think you will have noted that there's a tremendous backup of vehicles around the schools right now. I think most citizens have experienced that, or if you haven't, you likely will at some point. So we just need to note that that's going on, and we need to take into account efficiency is really going to matter here. And we're also going to take into note that we may be looking at a different pattern for the moment, at least. It may not be long term, and hopefully it's not. But for the moment, we are looking at a little bit of a different pattern of how students are getting to school. See our superintendents nodding over there.
Absolutely.
So they are living it. We're seeing it, feeling it. So thank you to the work of the Transportation Department. And we may come back and discuss some more there. This item has generated a lot of discussion, and so there are a couple other issues that have arisen from the discussion that may be very valuable for the board to look at as we go forward. BizOp 14 was a discussion item, and this is a request to allocate unallocated elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, again from ESSER 2 in this situation. Dr. Marr presented on behalf of the group, but Dr. Emery, Dr. Stegall, Dr. Taylor, and Dr. Edmonds all had a piece of it and were part of the presentation by way of the written materials that you received in terms of their oversight. The different items that are being considered for that were statewide portrait of a graduate, which is an important part of Operation Polaris that our superintendent is embarking upon. Instructional and leadership coaching support for the state's 3 residential schools in Southside, Ashpole Elementary, in the lab schools. And that's an amount of $150,000. The statewide portrait of a graduate was $200,000. Promising Practices, which is a research initiative, and is $500,000, and it's to be focused on programs like the summer school extension, summer bridge program, and the career accelerator program. Instructional support and coaching is $2.3 million, and the focus there is to continue to support the office led by Bev Emery, but part of the department led by Bev Emery that is very much working with our 44 low performing schools that are located in our low performing districts. And it's very important work, and we feel that there's very promising work being done there, and I think this is a very important part of the work that we will continue to do around the state. $100,000 would go to Teach NC to further support that. $150,000 would go to UNC Worldview, and $175,000 would go to development of further school socio-emotional profiles. The one thing to note here is that several of those items are also part of our budgetary request, and we very strongly have supported that budgetary request to the legislature. In the event that our budgetary requests on those items are accepted, and we very sincerely hope that they will, because they are in the best interests of the students of North Carolina. If they are, we have other extremely good uses to put those funds to. So there are no shortage of priorities, with the emphasis on being student focused and how we help our students recover from what they have gone through social, emotionally, and academically through the course of the pandemic. So That's a discussion item. It will come back up, and maybe if we're fortunate, we'll know more about the budget when it comes back up at our next item. That would be very helpful in guiding our thoughts as we go forward. We have 3 consent items. I mentioned 2 yesterday, but we actually have a third, as I said we might. Our first consent item is the report to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee on education waivers of state law rules granted to local education agencies. That's an annual report that we do. The second one, Biz Op 16, is also an annual report that we do, which is the report to the General Assembly about the State Agency Mobile Device Report. Agency in this instance being DPI, obviously. That's an annual required report. The consent item, Biz Op 17, will be certification of a North Carolina finance officer, and specifically for Scotland County. We have a request for that, and as you know, it's not unusual for us to receive those kinds of requests for certification of chief financial officers. We also, so those 3 items will be up for vote as consent items. We also had the ability to review and ask any questions on our executed contracts report and our planned contracts report. We got a brief update from Ron Paxton on our agency vacancy report, which let us know the kind of work and development and progress that was being made in hiring a number of people that are important to our ongoing efforts with respect to the learning recovery initiatives that are very much in process at the department in many different respects. And finally, we had the briefest of monthly budget reports from Alexis Schaus, which was to say that it's hard to report until we know further detail about the budget, which is in progress and which we expect the budget by next month. I shouldn't say we expect. We're very hopeful that by next month we may have a budget, in which case we'll have a much more detailed report on the monthly budget report at that point. So let me open the floor if there's any questions or comments, and otherwise that would complete the report. I'm advised it doesn't complete the report that I missed Biz Op 8, which was a big one to miss, and I apologize. That's our 5-year facility needs survey report, which we'd be voting to accept. And this is another area where we make this obviously a very important report. We only get it every 5 years, and it goes to the environment in which our students are receiving their educational services, which can be very important to the success of our students. Not nearly as important as the teachers that are in the classroom and the other people that are in the building, but it still can be an important support for our students. And so we got an excellent report from Nathan Mon about what was received and put it in context for us in terms of what it includes, what it does not include, which was very helpful, I think. Coming out of this, I think there are a number of questions board members reflected that some additional information and discussion may be helpful to us as we continue to put our arms around this. And to the extent there's any discussion about a state bond project, which has happened in the past, it's something obviously that we would want to have this information very firmly in mind as any discussion arose about that. So we may come back and have some further discussion as the department continues to digest and analyze all the information that was received. So with that, hopefully I am done, and thank you for looking out for me.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. Thank you for your humble leadership and for setting the record. I think this committee report sets the record for the number of items in a state board meeting, at least during my short tenure on the board. So, and thanks to all the members of the department. So many went into putting together all these items and doing such terrific work to support our students.
Yes.
Any questions from my colleagues on the Biz Op report? Very well. Then I now recognize Ms. Amy White, Chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee for that report. Ms. White.
Good morning, Chair Davis, colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to report on yesterday's work from the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. I shared that responsibility with Ms. Jill Kamnitz. We had an amazing in-person presentation from Dr. Tony Watlington, who is the superintendent in Rowan-Salisbury schools. Rowan-Salisbury is a renewal district The entire school system is a renewal district, and that means that they employ a number of different flexibility strategies granted them by HB 986 back in 2018. I reminded folks yesterday that many times as a part of our committee work, we'll bring individual schools for approval from districts all across our state, but this entire district made that decision several years ago to focus their efforts on all of the low-performing schools. So Dr. Wallington came to present the work that's being done there. As a part of the renewal report, as required by the State Board of Education, we asked him about the assessment instrument and the student outcomes. We talk about vacancies both at the leadership level. We talk about absences for students, and so Dr. Wallington brought all of that information to us for review. One of the highlights of the presentation yesterday was the slide that separated the difference between GLOws and GROWs, and I really appreciated the transparency that he provided for us, highlighting the good work that's being done, and I wanted to get that again in the record today. They've made an incredible effort to raise their graduation rates. They have seen significant drops in their dropout rate. They have had their CTE concentrators increase, and they have deep teacher and leader buy-in for renewal strategies as implemented across the district. But along with that, Dr. Wallington also shared that he had some opportunities for better positive outcomes. And with that, he focused on a renewed commitment to access renewal flexibilities and new local accountability models while educating the whole child. They're going to be focusing on increasing school growth and decreasing their low-performing schools. They really want to increase CTE industry credentials earned by students in their district, and that's just a point towards getting students ready to work. They wanted to be focused on better parent-community understanding, support, and partnerships moving forward. So we really appreciated that report. It's important for board members to know that at the end of 2022, 2023, they will make a more extensive report to us about the work that has been done, and then every 3 years afterwards. So we thank Dr. Wallington for taking the journey to be with us yesterday. And that was the only item of new business that we had. We did have a consent item, and that consent item is before you for approval, and that is the NC Access Report, which it's under Dr. Dave Machado's team, but Jay Whalen is the one who put together the information that shares how the federal grant that we received, totaling almost $36 million, focused on allowing and creating increased opportunities for educationally disadvantaged students, particularly either economically disadvantaged by income or by race, having access to high-quality charter schools. And so that information came to us yesterday. We had an opportunity to have a great dialogue the month before, and that is the end of my report, with 2 items, not 20 billion.
Thank you, Ms. White. Any questions on her 2 items? Hearing none, I'll turn to Dr. Olivia Oxendine, Chair of the Educator Standards and Practice Committee. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis, and good morning to everyone in the room, as well as those listening. I chair this. I have the honor of chairing this committee, and I have the honor of co-leading it with Ms. Amy White, who made clear note of her short agenda for September, because normally yours is rather lengthy as well. So 2 items are action items on an agenda of 4 items. So the first item pertains to changes in the policy language around the job specification of the category Brailleist. And those that recommendation for those changes is coming to us, and we'll be acting on that recommendation very shortly. It was presented by Ms. Vernelson and also Ms. Thomas, and even though it comes under the classification of Eval 001, there is certainly a relationship between evaluation of personnel and the job description of personnel. So those two areas of policy do go hand in hand. Just to kind of nutshell what this does, it basically says that the Braille list does not carry any teaching responsibility. The teaching of a visually impaired student is done by the certified personnel in the area of EC, Exceptional Children's area. So the Braille list is basically a translator of digital and print material. I think perhaps, I think I'm correct when I say the prior language may have inferred that the Braille list had some teaching responsibility, but that conflicts with IDEA regulations. So I'm pleased to say that the staff got on top of that. I think they were working very closely with a school district to bring about those corrections. So that is ready for us to act on in just a few minutes. Another item under action is the Advanced Teaching Roles and Teacher Compensation Request. The RFP is ready to go in about 2 weeks. I think September 15th is the day it's going to be released to 115 school districts and probably charters as well. This is coming to us by way of the department looking at our strategic plan, SB strategic plan, along with Leandro expectations, and a decision was made, let's get inside that RFP and strengthen it, enhance it, and as a result of changes in the RFP, those changes also rolled over into the rubric that is going to be used by reviewers to rate and make determinations about the successful applicants who are going to be recipients of the grants. The changes fall into 4 different categories. Enhancements, changes, and those 4 different categories were outlined for us yesterday by Dr. Tomberlin. The question that I posed had to do with, now that the LEAs and charters have a recipe for how to strengthen and how to have a competitive grant, or proposal I should say, now that they know how to do that because it's carefully laid out in the criterion, the 4 criterion that make up the 4-part criterion, criteria, I'm getting those 2 words confused. Then the question goes to the heart of then what will we look for as a mark of distinction? And Dr. Tomberlin suggested that the reviewers will pay attention to the quality of the product, the innovation, the creative thinking around those 4 areas. So this is about ready to be released. It will come back to us in December for our approval. Under discussion, ES&P 3, Dr. Kim Evans presented to us on the annual report of the Professional Educator Preparations and Standards Commission, and she walked us through the membership of the commission, the length of terms on the commission, and she provided in the report, in the material, links to the bounty of work that is accomplished by Pepsi. The suggestion to Dr. Evans and also to Pepsi is perhaps next year and all future reports, if we have a status and update on like an outcomes update, outcomes of effort might strengthen that report. Moving to discussion, ES&P 3, I'm sorry, we're already there. The last item under discussion, ES&P 4, the policy amendment, licensing testing requirements, which does fall in the category of licensing policy category of LICN 003, pertains to the foundations of reading, and we do have Dr. Seiberg advised us yesterday that we will have 2 forms of that test posted on the website. 090 is the current edition of Foundations of Reading. 190 is the revised version of Foundations of Reading. Applying a statistical tool known as the standard error of measurement, the cut score for 090 is 229 on a scale of 100 to 300. The revised version, applying an SEM, is 233, also on a range of 100 to 300. So both tests will remain on the website for 2 years, and during that 2-year window, EPPs will have an opportunity to look at their curricula in the area of reading education and any other course requirements that are related to elementary education and general education, EC. So that is a discussion item. It will return next month for our approval. So that concludes my report. Chair Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Any questions on the 2 items before us today on action or the 2 discussion items? Very good. Then I'll turn to Ms. Jill Kamnitz, Chair of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, for our final committee report of the day. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the responsibility for the work of this committee with Dr. Olivia Oxendine. And this month, we brought to you 2 items of new business. We started with an update on the Rethink grant by Ms. Melissa Davis. We received this U.S. Department of Education grant to support and improve K-8 remote learning and access to excellent instruction. Specifically, these I missed a spot there. The grant will provide resources to PSUs across the state with additional targeted support to Tier 1 districts. Specifically, these resources fall into 4 categories. The first is implementation support, which is being offered to our Tier 1 districts. The second is professional development, which follows the train the trainer model. And the first enrollment window is getting strong response right now, and that will be the first cohort of trainers that will be available to work with teachers in their districts to improve the instruction particularly in blended learning. Badges will be offered through this training in facilitator pathway and blended instruction pathway. There's also linked to this research-based blended learning models that will be developed. The third category is standards-aligned content, which will be developed in K-8, English Language Arts, Math, Science, and Social Studies. And that work has begun with the 6 to 8 math content. Finally, parents will be supported through technical assistance webinars, guides of grade and subject matter materials, and that parent support will be provided in consultation with a parent advisory group that is being formed. Our next new business was a computer science initiative update, and Mary Hemphill introduced us to that work. We got our first look at the K-12 computer science landscape map and dashboard, which were developed in partnership with the Friday Institute. These are a rich source of information about the current status of computer science instruction across the state, and they will help us determine what districts and regions need more support to get programs established and students enrolled, as well as identifying those who are ahead of the game and accessing their knowledge and experience to improve what we offer to our students in computer science. Mr. Morris walked us through the layers of the data that are found in the map and the dashboard, from the statewide level to the region level to the school level. Enrollment data is available by subgroup, as is the growth of student enrollment and opportunities by school. So this is, again, a very rich source of information that will eventually be linked with the strategic plan dashboard that's in development. We then moved to actions on first read. The first was SLA 1, State Board of Education Policy Amendment to the 2021-22 Read to Achieve Implementation Guide. Dr. Amy Ryan had told us last month that this guide will be coming to us in sections as they are developed according to statute and circumstance. This is an effort to get as much information as possible out to our schools, so we're developing it as we go. This time we heard about Section 3, and we'll vote on that today. That is before us now as a result of our approval of the Voyager Sopris Letters contract a couple of weeks ago. And that section includes letters and preschool resources that will support this ongoing work. SLA 2 involves the Read to Achieve local alternative assessments. Dr. Howard presented this to us, and it is required because in addition to the state-funded tool, which is now Amplify, the Read to Achieve requirement can be fulfilled through an alternative assessment that must be approved by the state board. So this list comes before us regularly, and Dr. Howard just briefly highlighted the changes from last year's list, which involves some name changes and then the deletion of Amplify, since that program is being offered to all districts and PSUs across the state. SLA 3, 2021 school student test performance results. Again, Dr. Howard, she had a busy morning yesterday. Before reviewing the results, she reminded us that the U.S. Department of Education and the North Carolina General Assembly had waived school performance grades and the designation of low-performing schools for this year. While test administration was required, the information will be used to plan appropriately for individual student learning this year. She cautioned that while the 2018 and to 2019 results were included for context, comparison with prior year data should be made only with the recognition of the uniqueness of the 2021 school year. Looking at the data, the requirement for 95% participation by the U.S. Department of Education was waived, but in fact the report showed us that there was a relatively small drop in those percentages across our state. The testing participation was quite robust considering the circumstances. Dr. Howard then reviewed our statewide reading, math, and science EOG scores by grade and by college and career readiness, which reflects the number of students at level 4, and grade level proficiency, which reflects the number of students at levels 3 and 4. These standards each showed a decrease in proficiency as we had expected. Test results were also disaggregated by subgroup, and again, with 3 exceptions, all groups had a decrease in the percentage for both grade level proficiency and college and career ready. We also reviewed ACT data, work keys, and English language learners' exit results. This is our first look at this data, and we can expect a student learning loss report, which will give us a deeper understanding of the impacts of the effects of COVID. But in the meantime, our teachers, students, and families will use the information contained in this report to recover and accelerate learning this year. I would recommend those who are interested to dive more deeply into the actual report, which provides a rich amount of data. SLA 4, also Dr. Howard, reported on our 2020-21 cohort graduation rate. The report includes both a 4-year and a 5-year cohort graduation rate for all schools and districts. When we look across a 3-year comparison, so that would be 2017 to 2018, 2018 to 2019, 2019 to 20, and then this past year, it is apparent that the past year showed no atypical changes in any subgroup insofar as the graduation goes, which was good news. Our discussion items started with SLA 5, 2021-22 Alternative Schools Accountability Model Options. Our 97 alternative schools have 3 different ways to participate in state accountability. One of those schools is opting to just report a school performance grade. 75 will report data on student achievement and growth, and 21 schools chose the option of submitting their own accountability models, which we will be approving or voting on today. All 21 of those plans meet the new rule requirements and were vetted for reliability and validity. SLA 6 is a report to the JLEOC on College and Career Ready Graduate Program. Ms. Shaw Coltrane reminded us that this program, which is operated jointly with the North Carolina Community College System, was created by legislation to ensure that eligible high school seniors enter the community college system remediation-free. Community college system provides content that we teach in our high schools. We require an online platform in order to run the program, and we're able to offer the initial implementation in spring 2021 through one-time funding. Almost 10,000 students participated and many earned credits necessary to avoid remediation. However, funding will have to be available through this year's budget to continue this program. If it is not, the department will look for other possible cost-free options to meet these remediation needs of our high school students. SLA 7 is a report to the General Assembly, 2020-21 fifth grade career awareness program. Ms. Jacqueline Wyatt explained to us that each LEA is encouraged but not required to develop this program for its fifth grade students. But those who do participate are required to report to the General Assembly annually. This is done through a survey that was revised and improved this year, and the response rate was extremely strong, 113 PSUs, or 60% of our schools. I'm sorry, I got my numbers wrong. The response rate was very strong. 60% of the schools participated, which was a small drop in the number of schools, but not surprising that there was a drop given the situation last year. Ms. Wyatt shared what emerged as best practices from the survey, which included middle school tours, high school tours, and field trips, job shadowing, guest speakers, and career events. Finally, 2 consent items. SLA 8 is a report to the General Assembly on the Founding Principles course. This report is required by annually, and it outlines DPI's work in supporting districts and schools with the implementation of this new course. Finally, SLA 9 is a report to the General Assembly on the educational performance of children with disabilities. IDEA requires submission of an annual performance report, which covers 17 prescribed indicators. These indicators are part of our state performance plan, which aims to implement IDEA and improve outcomes for students with disabilities. And that brings me to the end of this committee report.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. Any questions on the Student Learning and Achievement Committee report from my colleagues? Very good. Hearing none, board members, that concludes our committee reports. We do have one item for the board's consideration under the chairman's report, and I turn to Mr. Brandon Walker for this presentation. Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Just no better way to end our day with the most exciting topic on our agenda is our rules. So just as a brief way of background, in 2013, the General Assembly passed some new legislation that required each agency to review the rules on their books every 10 years. And the Rules Review Commission is charged with creating that schedule for review. We were scheduled in 2014 with a 2016 date to have this accomplished. And as we all remember, there was a lawsuit to determine whether the Department of Public Instruction had to, in fact, engage in this rulemaking process. So everything kind of got shelved until that lawsuit was resolved. Turns out we are subject to that rulemaking process, so here we go again. And a couple months ago, the board approved our rulemaking process, and the first step of that process is to determine unnecessary rules. So there was 140 rules on the books that needed to be reviewed April 1st, 2014. Everything after April 1st, 2014 is taken care of. So we're looking at everything pre-2014. So that's 140 rules. And that was given to our staff to review and determine whether basically, are they using these rules? Are they still applicable to this day? Out of those 140 rules, there was 18 that were determined unnecessary. And it's basically 4 categories that they fall into. They're either superseded by a new rule that we engaged, like that came on the books after 2014, that was a part of the new process that we were going through. A rule may be out of date and determined unnecessary by our DPI staff that they're no longer using or have any willingness to enforce. A rule may be expired, and lastly, the policy has been rescinded, so there's no longer any use for a rule. So that's the four major categories, and I've put together an outline and tried to keep them under the major categories of where the rules are stemming from. But if there's any questions, I'll really turn it over to the board. I mean, I can walk you through each rule, but I don't know if there's much need for that. So I'll just entertain any questions that you may have.
So, Mr. Walker, just to clarify for my colleagues, what's under the board's consideration today is to approve these 18 as unnecessary in our submission to the Rules Review Commission?
Correct, and as that plays forward, so that's our first step. So we're asking you to approve these 18 rules as unnecessary. Then it will be posted for 60 days for public review on both DPI's website and on the Rules Review Commission's website. And once we play it forward, these 18 rules will be removed from the books. Now the other, my math is correct, 122 rules we need to readopt. So that's the big lift that's going to be coming down the road, but that's not what we're concerned with here today. So yes is the short answer to your question.
Great, thank you. Questions from my colleagues for Mr. Walker?
I have a quick question.
Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. My question is this. I mean, I've heard about rulemaking for a long time. I don't know nearly enough and probably don't need to know much more, except who, other than satisfying the law, who benefits from a rule?
Well, in the hierarchy of things, we have our statutes, that's the law, and then oftentimes the agency is in charge with interpreting that law, and that's our policies. But if we want to enforce a policy, we need to turn it into a rule, because that gives us the legal strength to enforce it. A policy is really just something that we're saying, this is what we want you to do, but if we want the teeth behind that policy, that's where the rule comes in.
So enforcement at the LEA level or an EPP if
or
is applicable.
wherever the rule applies.
I see.
We're really looking outward facing because a policy is really more inward, internal DPI. So we don't have to turn that into a rule because we have the ability to enforce those ourselves. But if anybody outside the agency, whether it's a contractor, a third-party contractor, an LEA, what have you, that's where the rule comes into place.
All right, thank you. Good.
Thank you for that question. Any others? Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Absolutely.
Appreciate your good work on this.
Oh, and I'm working with Tom Zyko and more importantly, Lou Martin. She's been really instrumental in getting a lot of this legwork and really keeping me in line. So.
We express our appreciation to them as well. Colleagues, that concludes our items before us at this meeting. We'll now vote on any item requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report was provided on each item, including any respective consent items. And I'll remind you that any item on the consent agenda is primarily not complex and has come from the board for discussion in a prior month. And I note also that board members have seen these consent agenda items for at least a week. At this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from the consent action or action on first reading agendas.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Ford.
This is not a request for removal, but rather recusal from BizOp 17.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Ford has recused himself from BizOp 17. Thank you. Any other comments or requests to remove items? Hearing none, I seek a motion to approve the following: the August 4th and 5th, 2021 meeting minutes, the August 19th, 2021 meeting minutes, and the following items: SLA 1 through 4 and 8 and 9, EICS 1, BizOp 1 through 13 and 15 through 17, ES&P 1 and 2, the IPL and ILT licensure approval recommendations discussed and closed, the residential schools and ISD hire recommendation discussed and closed, and the rules review submission to the Rules Review Commission as presented in this meeting. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Sorry about that, yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. That concludes our work for today. I want to thank all of my colleagues, our superintendent, every member of DPI, and all of our partners who contributed to this successful meeting. But in particular, I'd like to thank our advisors for their timely, informative, and valuable comments. And also note that once again, they have outnumbered the members of the board in in-person attendance. So we're going to have a little competition here going forward. But even more, I'd like to express my personal appreciation to every superintendent, principal, teacher, and educator across our state for a successful reopening of schools this year under, once again, challenging conditions. You've demonstrated the leadership, the personal caring, and the commitment to our students in reopening our schools this year for in-person instruction. And we're always and highly indebted to each one of you. So thank you. I now seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine, second by Vice Chair Duncan. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Ford? Mr. Ford? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. We're adjourned.